Hi, and welcome to Danny After Dark. If you're new here, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss a notification or a new episode. Tonight, we have a very special guest back, Travis Myers from the Another Nobody podcast. Not even 30 seconds in, I'm already butchering words tonight. If you have not seen his previous time on here, definitely make sure to check that out as well as subscribe to his podcast. We're going to get into a lot more tonight. We talked a lot last time he was here. He is also, if you don't know, which I'm excited to have my book, the author of the Tommy Keanne novel. So without further ado, let's bring back Travis from the Another Nobody podcast. Hi, Travis.
Hey, Danny, how you doing?
Good, and you?
Very good, very good. Thank you so much for having me back. I really enjoyed our talk last time, and I'm excited to return.
I'm excited you're back. That was so much fun last time. I feel like the amount of stories that you told was only like the tip of the iceberg of like all of the stories that you have.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about that.
And you know what I want to do too? Shame on me last time. Hold on one second. Is it here? Oh, I don't. Ah, damn it, I don't see it. I wanna give a little shout out to our friend Tony Wright for getting us together, because
Yeah.
although we mentioned his name last time, it was right in the first couple of seconds, and you said, "Hey, Tony Wright sent you." I said, "Yeah, Tony," and that was it. But Tony Wright's a good fella, and he wrote the book on the Yuba County Five, which is phenomenal. So I just wanted to give him a proper thank you this time around. So.
Yes, Tony is awesome. And I have his book. I did a review of it. Such a great book highlighting a sadly still unsolved
Oh, it's
case.
a crazy story. It really is it's a mystery. It's a true mystery, you know?
Mhm.
And Tony did do in that book, he is well, I call him the leading authority because that's what he is. He really did some detective work there and, figured out as much as he could and documented it all, something that nobody's done as of yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent book. And yeah, thank you, Tony, for introducing me and Travis.
Yes.
Even though I know me and you like met in passing at CrimeCon. Like I know we
Yes.
did
Yes, I
before,
believe so. I believe we did.
but we will officially be together at CrimeCon this year. And then also, like less than 3 weeks away, me and you will be at the True Crime Podcast
That's right.
Festival.
True Crime Podcast Festival. And is it Danvers? Is
It's
that
in Danvers.
Danvers, Massachusetts? Yep. And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. I've never been to that yet. So.
Same. We both have booths. So yeah, if anybody's in the area, I know I've been talking about this event like almost every single show, but Travis will be there too. So if you're gonna go and you're in the area, not only check out my booth, but check out Travis too.
Yes, please come say hello. Please
Yeah,
come say hello.
absolutely. My close friend Liz, which I hope she jumps in the chat tonight, but she has gotten your book and loves it. And she will be there and she's looking forward to meeting you. So I will properly introduce you to.
Very good. Very, very good. I'm looking forward to meeting her. So.
Yeah. So it's funny because me being from here for the True Crime Podcast Festival, when they're like Boston, but it's in Danvers, I'm like, that's not really Boston, but that's okay.
I think they have to do that. Not that they have to do that, but it's everybody knows Boston, and it is truly just outside, is it not? What is it? 20 minutes away?
Boston, I would say probably like 30, 35 minutes north.
Okay.
Without traffic.
Yes.
If you do it in rush hour, multiply that by like 3. But anyway, so let's see. We have a few people here in the chat, and Travis is willing to, answer y'all's questions too.
Oh, please.
So
Yeah,
by
please.
all means, if you guys have any questions for him,
That's what excites me so much about doing this with you, Danny. I've been on dozens of different podcasts, and you are the first and only one where people actually write in. I think that's so exciting. It's this modern technology is phenomenal. It really is. People can join us.
Yeah, when I first started my channel, I like pre-recorded everything and then kind of gradually shifted to doing live. And I get to, just in real time chat with everybody, but then also in real time butcher words like there's no tomorrow. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's tough. You can't edit out the things, the mistakes that you make.
You sure can't. So, all right, James Watson's already chirping in the chat. Yes, we were like 2 minutes late, James. It's okay. It's okay. Hey, Tony Stewart. Judas Bruce, hello. Richard, hello. K-Dog, I won $100 on a bet that Koberger would plead. We'll talk about that for sure later this week. Yeah. Have you been following that case at all, Travis?
No, it's funny. What was your biggest one? The Reed case that
the Karen Reed case.
Karen Reed case. Thank you. It's a funny thing for me. Okay, and everybody's especially here with all the true crime fans. I really don't follow a lot of stuff. Obviously, I hear things on the news. I pay attention to the news. I know what's going on with all of these things, but I don't get down and dirty and follow them. Literally the majority of my life has been, I've been inundated with crime, and I don't want to say I don't care because that sounds, crass, or cold. I do absolutely care what happens, but for the most part, I can't be bothered following it or paying attention to it. And, I know in the end, Karen Reed got off. Was she guilty or not? In real life, I couldn't tell you, and I don't know if we'll ever really know because it was such a huge media circus, again, that things become so twisted and bastardized by the time it gets to us, the people. And from knowing how courts work on the inside, what was admitted, what wasn't admitted, what the lawyers were allowed to say, what they weren't allowed to say, I just kind of divorced myself from it as a whole, But it sounds like this Koberger guy pled guilty. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Well, good. I hope they hammer him anyway. I'd love to see that guy put away for life, if not the death penalty. I don't know what they get in Idaho.
The news that broke, I knew something was going on because, and shout out to Tony Stewart for messaging me. Yeah, my phone blew up and I'm like, something's happening right now.
Yeah.
And he took a plea so that the death penalty is now off the table and he will not try to appeal. Good.
Well, that's what he wanted. He wanted to avoid the death penalty, so that's why he pled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
that's a terrible case. Terrible case. Unbelievable.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I'll talk about that later in the week because Lord knows we could. No need to talk about that tonight. But anyway, so while kind of people are trickling in and as me and Travis are kind of talking, if anybody has any questions for Travis, please let him know. And we'll definitely get that question up on the screen. But I know there was a bunch of stuff that we weren't able to talk about, stories that you had last time you were here. I know when we were talking about having you back on, you had mentioned a few topics. And one of them so you mentioned about, which I thought was really cool, about and I know I'm going to butcher it, the 84th Street Bombers?
84th Street Bombers.
Yes, I got it.
You got it.
So for those who don't know what that is, because I did not know what that is, and I think it's so cool. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, the 84th Street Bombers is really, just like the name of my podcast, we were just a bunch of nobodies. We were a bunch of nothing, nobody kids. Okay. And this had come up a few times. If anybody ever listens to Desperately Seeking the 80s, okay, that's a podcast two New York girls, Meg and Jess, do, and they talk all about 80s New York City, 80s crime and fashion and nightlife. Everything that happened in the 80s is their shtick, if you will. And I've been on there like 4 or 5 times, and maybe 3 or 4 times. And I'll tell whatever stories they ask about the old neighborhood, about New York City, et cetera, because a lot of people do like to kind of reminisce and hear about New York City, even if they're not from New York City. There's, I guess, a mystique to it, So the 84th Street Bombers. This was a crew of characters that I hung out with. I was an 84th Street bomber on 84th Street and First Avenue in New York City in the 70s and 80s. And the funny thing with that, we were just, again, poor young nobodies that nobody in the world cared about outside of each other. And of course, maybe our mothers and fathers, we were poor nobodies. But what had happened and what became kind of interesting, I'll tell you some stories if you like, but what was interesting
Oh,
for me
absolutely.
and how it came back was I was doing research for when I had written Sister Margaret, our first couple of books, and Hayden John Marshall, the second one. And what I would do is I would go back and forth. Thank you. I would go back and forth to make sure I had addresses correct. If I was mentioning a Chinese restaurant or a pizzeria or something that happened on a certain block, I wanted to make sure I had the block right and the address right. Because although, you reading the book, you may not care at all. If somebody's from that neighborhood, they're going to know I'm wrong. So you want to be as accurate as possible, right? And in doing so, I came across a thing that said 84th Street Gang. And I'm like, oh, what is this? And I looked it up. And they were talking about us, And then the more I looked at it, I found New York Times articles that would mention, sometimes it would just be a line, but they would mention 84th Street Gang or 84th Street Bombers, okay? What do you call it? A woman who, New York Magazine did a whole thing about Robert Chambers. If you remember the Robert Chambers case, he was the preppy killer that killed Jennifer.
Yeah, I covered him a while ago. Yeah.
And they tied us to him. Okay. Because
in what way?
I'll tell you.
Oh.
So he had a kid that he was doing burglaries with and doing and he was a wealthy prep school kid, right?
Yeah.
But, it's New York City and everybody lives in the city together, just the same as, from where you are in Boston, everybody's kind of in the mix together because you ride the train together, you go to the movies together, you do all these different things, whether you live in a very, very expensive apartment or own your own house or you live in a tenement building or a hovel. We all live on within blocks of each other. So we get to know each other, right?
Right.
Anyway, he had this friend that he used to do, bad things with, named Dave Filyaw. Now, I knew Dave. Dave was not one of us. He was a little bit younger, and he didn't hang out with us, but I knew who he was from the neighborhood, okay? And I think what the connection probably was is that I think he would come down to First Avenue, buy drugs off of my friends, a couple of friends that I had that sold drugs, okay, and would take them and sell them at, to the prep school kids up on Lexington Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue, wherever, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, this Dave Filyaw, just like, I can't remember the guy's name now.
Robert Chambers?
Robert Chambers, thank you very much. Also, if you look him up, he ended up doing a rape and stabbing up a girl from Columbia University.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy, these two characters are together, but, they're bad, deviant people, right? Anyway, so this was the article that was in New York Magazine, and they linked us to him, which was not true at all. I never met Robert Chambers in my life, but I did know who Dave Filyaw was from the neighborhood. A woman whose name escapes me, but used to date JFK Jr., not JFK Jr. Yeah, JFK Jr., the one that killed himself in the airplane.
Oh,
John F. Kennedy Jr.
Is it Carolyn Bessette?
No, it's not her. It's I can't think of her name, but she wrote a memoir about dating him. Okay. And she had dated him, and they had a problem up on Fifth Avenue, again, fairly far removed from where we were hanging out, with some guys who would, I don't know if they had roughed them up or, tried to rob them, whatever. And the Secret Service jumped in. It was a whole story. And they blamed these rough and tumble 84th Street kids, this 84th Street gang from down on York Avenue. Again, I do not believe it was us because I never heard this story before I found it. But it was amazing to me that I would find all of these things and start digging them up. And then there was one that was very interesting to me because it seemed the most realistic, where we had a mention on a thing called Stone Greasers or something like that, which is a website that collected all different kinds of gangs from all over the country. And if you look up New York, you can find 84th Street Bombers. And it gives a little description where we used to hang out, how we used to hang out, mentions, sadly, a friend of mine, he's long past now, a guy I knew who committed a homicide, and a little racial incident that had happened on the corner, different things like this. And it turned out we were a thing, and none of us knew it. We never knew it. We had a little reunion of guys, and all in all, we probably had about 14, 15 core members. We literally have, I have a tattoo that says 84th Street on my shoulder. We had these little shirts. If you look on my Instagram, you'll see posts of me with my 84th Street shirt that we had. We couldn't afford jackets. We had T-shirts. If you remember the old iron-on jobs where they would press, that kind of stuff. And, again, really, we were just young kids with nothing going on. The reunion I wanted to say. So about 9 of us got together 2 years ago in a little pub called Ryan's Daughter that we used to hang out in when we were underage 40 years ago, and literally, I know these guys some of them for 50 years, and anyway, we all got together and it was a great night out. And it was interesting because none of them were privy to any of this information. What I was telling them about New York Magazine, the New York Times, except with the exception of my brother Henry, because I didn't share it. We're not really these computer guys that send everything all over the place and talk to each other.
Right.
We do it in person. And I was like, yes, this is true. And everybody's looking it up on their phone. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. And it is, to us, it was a big surprise because, again, we never thought anything or very much of ourselves. And to find out that we were not famous, what were we? Infamous in the neighborhood, and really even then the stories that were told were exaggerations and overblown newspaper nonsense. But it was interesting that anybody in the world gave a shit about us at all, to tell you the truth. And that was the funny fact there. So
that's so wild. That's so wild. I just can't imagine you telling them.
Plate there. See, it says 84th Street.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Kane asks a question. Do you know the bar in New York, Dorian's? It's
Dorian's Red Hand. I believe it's still there. And that is where actually Robert Chambers, who we just mentioned, left. They left Dorian's, him and Jennifer Levin. They had known each other for years, as far as I know. I think they had a strong relationship before he killed her. But they had left there. That was their last stop before going to Central Park for her murder. So. And
it's still open.
From what I understand, yes.
Interesting. Tony Stewart says Travis sounds interesting. Of course he does, Tony Stewart. K-Dog. So the story you were telling sounds like a gang from the West Side Story.
Well, I tell you what, although West Side Story is, again, it's a fictional story and it's a musical and it's fun and it's got singing, it's not that far removed from real life, to be honest with you. The way it's designed and set up, whoever wrote it, when it was put together, they knew what they were talking about.
Corey Novak, he's not a real New Yorker unless he can tell us what Avenue A, B, C, and D stand for.
Oh, well, I don't know. But I'll tell you something interesting about Avenue A, B, C, and D is that York Avenue, okay, which does go through the Yorkville section of York on the east side, all right, is Avenue A. They changed it. They named it after Sergeant York after World War I. But York Avenue, which is the northern section of Avenue A, nobody knows that, okay? But if you go, there's a public school right up from John Jay Park, and it's actually still carved into the building where it says Avenue A. So.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But I don't know.
Can
you come back and tell me that? Because that's something that'd be an interesting bit of information, what Avenue A, B, and C actually stands for.
And I've never been to New York, so I have no clue.
Never. Interesting.
Never. I'm the only person in Massachusetts, I'm sure, that's never been to New York. I don't know how that happened in life. Kane says, so that's her cousin's bar. Dorian's. Interesting.
Well, is it? Can we ask her questions too? Yeah, because she's watching, right?
Sure.
Is it still owned by the Dorian family? Is John Dorian her her uncle or whatever that is.
Keanne, can you put the answer in the comments below?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So Tony Stewart makes a comment. Drug dealing in the 80s was wide open around here, referencing New York. Everything was plenty.
Yes. Yes. People don't remember that this New York City in the 70s and the 80s, the 70s is when the end of the 70s, I think it was 1976, if I'm not mistaken, the city was literally going bankrupt. It was turning into a Detroit before Detroit had turned into Detroit. And it was President Ford who refused to give federal aid to New York City. And the New York, I believe it was the Daily News, the headline was New York City dropped dead, from President Ford. That was his quote, which was certainly not his quote, but that's what they quoted him as saying. And it was a wild place. Now, for us growing up there as kids, you don't know any better. It's your home, but yeah, drugs were everywhere. At the time, they were doing things that large corporations would buy up blocks, literally buy entire city blocks, and do something called warehousing, which is it's illegal now. They still do it though. It's illegal. They just find a way around it. But they would buy these blocks and slowly chase everybody out by not repairing things or turning off the gas or turning off the electricity, turning off the water, et cetera, until they got everybody out. And then they would put up a high rise, And although it began in the 70s, you figure it was a good 10, 15-year process. It began in the 70s, and by the mid 80s, New York was in completely different place. And it was, myself, many of our friends were literally put out of their homes, apartments that it was strange. It was a different world back then too, for any New Yorkers that are listening, especially if you're older, like my age, where it was so much more small town, these neighborhoods. And quite often, a family might have 2 or 3 apartments in one building because that's how familiar it was. And so, your mother or your grandmother would live upstairs. It wasn't that they lived blocks away. They literally lived in the same building. We had an apartment, we were kind of like gypsies when we were kids. And every time the lease was up, my mother got a new apartment. And that lasted for quite a while. But we actually had 2 apartments on the same block because we knew that there was an older woman down the block who had gone to the hospital and wasn't coming back. And so my mother immediately got a hold of the landlord, because back then the landlords were real people also. They weren't giant corporations. And I remember his name, Mr. Fastenberg was his name. And she got with him and said, please, I need this apartment. I have a couple of kids. I need the extra bedroom, whatever. And he granted her the apartment, but we had to wait for this poor woman to pass before we could take over her apartment, and that's a true story. So, but it was just a different place. A lot of people don't believe me either when I tell them a lot of those old tenement buildings, the front doors weren't even locked. We would we would just, you would go to visit your friends. You would just walk in, they have the vestibule, the 2 doors in front to keep the wind out, but you could just walk right in, right upstairs, because it was just so much more relaxed, I guess is what I want to say. It was a different world. Although don't fool yourself, crime was definitely worse in the 70s and 80s than it is today, and of course the 90s when it was the worst that it ever was. But
I would love to hear stories about the 90s, myself, but it's not always about me. So I've been told. See, there's a few I wanted to follow up here. Okay, so Keanne says he's my cousin, but I'm not in close contact with them, so I don't know if it's still open. I believe it is, though.
I believe it is, and the Dorians, that's why it was named Dorian, is the family that owned it. So I think it was John Dorian who was actually from Ireland, the father.
Okay, well, good to know. Joanne Watson, hello. Danny, come to New York City. Travis, do you remember Cropsey? Did I say that right?
Well, Cropsey, if I'm not mistaken, she's talking about a mental institution that was on Staten Island.
I want to know about that.
And, well, I don't know if she may know better. I don't know if what do you call it? Was Cropsey the name of the mental institution, or if it was the crazy guy that was running around the woods trying to kill everybody around the mental institution. It's a very crazy story. I remember seeing it years ago, but again, I'm sorry, from what I remember 10, 15 years ago, I can't quite get the facts down straight. But I'm not sure if Cropsey was the actual name of the mental institution and or the bad guy who was supposedly this mysterious serial killer that lived in the woods there. I'm not sure.
Okay, Joanne, please elaborate more. Leave a comment. Oh my gosh, I'm like fascinated with that.
Well, I'm sure you can find a good documentary on it because I remember I saw one years ago.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm very excited. Corey Novak about the A, B, C, and D. All good. My friend John, who was lead singer of the Cro-Mags, does these Fear City tours. He says back in the day, if you walked down Avenue A, you were adventurous. B, you were bold. C, you were crazy. D, you were dead.
Okay, so my friend Corey, here you pulled a quick one on me because that's not actually what ABCD means. It happened to be ABCD and somebody nicknamed it. I get that. And as it happens, I'm a big Cro-Mags fan too. I actually did a couple of shows with them, not myself. I would put shows on with other bands because I owned a small punk rock bar for a while. Then an Altercation Records, if he's familiar at all with that, those were our bands that we worked with. And we did shows, well, literally all over the country and a few outside of the country. But I worked with the Cro-Mags, I want to say at least 4 times I did shows with them. So, and a good bunch of guys. So, excellent.
Very cool. Let's see. Tony Stewart, New York City 70s was on the edge when Son of Sam was running loose.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. 70, again, that was 76, back to what we were just talking about when the city was going bankrupt. It was a crazy year. You had Son of Sam, you had the blackout, the bankruptcy, which luckily never came. Somehow they found their way out of that. It was a nutty time. It was a Wild West. New York City in the 70s was the Wild West. It really was. So.
Oh, man. Let's see. Judas, that's funny. I know Harley and Joseph as well.
Oh, well, again, more Cro-Mags is what we're talking about.
Oh, that's what, okay. Yeah. See, I don't know that.
Small world. You never know.
Oh, goodness. So I would like to, okay, what was one of the comments that
In fact, for your friends right there, you're obviously New York City friends. If you look over my right-hand shoulder here, you see this orange poster?
Yeah.
That's actually a blow-up of Tom DeVita's card from his tattoo shop on West 4th Street, or East 4th Street, rather, okay? And I will bet you dollars to donuts, my New York City friends, that the Cro-Mags, whoever got tattooed by Tom DeVita. So there you go. As am I. I got my first and second tattoos were from Tom DeVita when I was 16 years old, back in whatever that would have been,
10 years ago.
1981. So
okay. I was going to ask if you got any tattoos, but okay, very cool.
Oh, I'm filthy with tattoos. So,
how many tattoos do you have?
I don't know. I have a lot. So I really don't know.
Yeah, no, I love tattoos. I love like most of mine are covered. So I think people only ever see that and they're like, oh, that's a cute one at first. And I'm like, I think that was like my 10th or 11th, but mine are all
10th or 11th. So you're an official tattoo girl then.
I'll have to, I have like my thighs done. And my last one I got during the pandemic, it takes up my whole calf. It's like it's a black and gray like skull with flowers around it. That was 6.5 straight hours. That was, but so worth it. I love it.
Good.
Yeah, don't let the innocent face fool you. Oh gosh. So yeah, I would love to hear personally some stories. Like, okay. So I feel like everybody here has been asking a mix of like 70s, 80s, 90s, but like I would love some good stories about like, especially like any that like you were, and I don't know if there's some you can't say, but any that you kind of worked that, some that are just kind of that stand out. Oh, and I know that's a very open and vague question.
These stories, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, all you crime people, of course, like these awful stories. So I'll
You
give you some awful
crime
stories.
people.
All right. Well, it's true. True crime. You're a true crime podcast. You're a true crime girl. That's what you like. You like these rotten stories. Let me see. Well, I I have many, many that I could tell you. We'll tell you about I was working anti-crime at the time. Okay. Anti-crime is plain clothes, but kind of dressed just like I am now, just regular clothes, plain clothes, not sometimes you say plain clothes, people think you're wearing like a blazer and slacks. No, plain clothes are plain clothes, exactly that. In anti-crime, our job is we're not what we call chained to the radio. We don't answer the radio anymore. We go out and predominantly we look for people with guns. Okay. And we just go out all day and do the stop, question, frisk thing, and try to get people with guns, try to get people with guns, try to get people with guns. So much so that when we would find people with drugs, oftentimes, okay, unless it was a really large amount, we'd either throw it in the sewer or I'd give it back to them and say, "You got any information for me?"
Mm.
And that's how we worked. And we would do our best to, get as many guns off the street a month as we could. On this particular day, I was working with a young fellow named Victor, who I like very much. And a call came over the radio of a woman shot on this. I can't remember exactly what the address was, but it was just off of Fordham Road and Davidson Avenue in the Bronx. And Davidson Avenue was on that particular block in particular was a heavy, heavy drug block. I can name, well, nobody would know, but I can name like 4 different spots at the time on that block itself where they sold crack, heroin, whatever you wanted, right? So we just happened to be sitting on the corner there. So we answered the radio, which again is something that we normally wouldn't do. It wasn't in our job description, so to say. We pulled up to the building, we walk inside, and we go up to the second floor to the apartment, right, where the call had come from. And when we get there, the radio is really loud. The music is really loud coming from it. This is not a good sign, okay? And then before I knock, I check the door to see if it's open, and it's opened. Again, another not good sign. Okay. So, we take our pistols out, we do the police thing and we open the door slowly. Hello, hello, anybody home? And again, the music is blasting. I go to the first room. Victor's right behind me. And I got my pistol out, and first room is empty, clear. Second room is empty, clear. Kitchen's on the left-hand side, clear. We get to the following door, okay? It's not clear. All right. And I look at this thing and I turn to Victor. I said, Victor, we got something here. Okay. And we did. And what we had was a double homicide and this poor girl, young 15-year-old girl, who was also shot. Now, to kind of paint the picture for you, okay? Again, the music is going very, very loud, but at this stage, now we can turn it off because we're not scared of getting shot anymore because we kind of secured the apartment. And it's the back bedroom, and there's just a bed there, a dresser, a couple of dressers. There's a body lying on the floor, kind of hunched over an end table, a side table that had been knocked over, and this body's hunched over that. And there's another body on the bed that had been tortured before they were shot. And what they had done is he was duct taped around his wrists and around his ankles, male of about, 18, 20 years old. And they had duct taped his entire face from the top of his forehead to his chin so he could no longer breathe. Okay. And what the story came out later on, what they were trying to do was get drugs and money off of these guys. These guys were drug dealers, and this young 15-year-old girl was dating one of them. Okay. And so the guy that they had taped up, okay, and tortured, he had obviously gotten it the worst. They're both dead, but he had been tortured prior to being killed, and they shot him a couple of times. But I don't want to say interesting, the sad thing was the bullets didn't kill him. And how do we know this? Well, the bullets did kill him eventually, but we knew that his heart was still beating, okay, because the amount of blood was so much that it soaked through the mattress and the box spring. And I mean, there was like, 2 quarts of blood on the floor under the bed that had soaked through from him bleeding through his gunshot wounds. Because when you're dead, your heart stops beating and your blood stops pumping. You see? So this poor fella had been all wrapped up with this duct tape all over his face, his nose, his mouth, his eyes, and shot twice, and had survived long enough to bleed out all over, through the mattress. And that's a lot of blood. That's a lot of blood. The other guy had taken 2 shots too, but they had gotten him in the back of the head. So whatever happened, we don't know, but it happened so quickly. Now this poor young girl, all right, and again, to kind of paint a picture, I step in and she's sitting on the edge of the bed next to this dead body and next to the telephone that was on the end table. Back then there was no cell phones. We still used regular dial-up, or push button telephones. And she's sitting there, and they had put the gun to her temple, okay, and shot her, all right, and left her for dead. But what had happened, bullets do very strange things. Although the gun was right here, pressed up against her head, the bullet went down. It didn't go into her brain. It went down her cheek like this, through the inside of her mouth, took out about 6 teeth or so, okay, and came out the other side of her cheek here. And her teeth were literally laying across the bed, but it had knocked her unconscious. And we don't know how long she was out cold, if it had been minutes, a half an hour, 2 hours she was unconscious. We have no idea from when the actual incident occurred to the time she actually called, because she was unconscious and the other 2 guys were dead, And so that's the gist of that, okay, as far as what had happened that night. Then, of course, once crime scene is done and everybody gets to work and the detectives on the case take care of it, it turned out in the end, we scooped up 3 guys for this homicide, okay? And it was no big, exciting story there, chasing people down, shooting them out, whatever, anything like that. It was very simple that neighborhoods are small and somebody always talks. And I think it was something as ridiculous as either one of the other girlfriends or sister or cousin or mother or somebody was actually talking about this in the laundromat. And other people knew about it. And so the people that overheard the conversation in the laundromat, got a hold of the detectives that had the case, and we all went and scooped them up. All right. Now there's a word that's used sometimes. I don't know if any of your listeners will be familiar with it, or you yourself are, called a Bronx jury. Are you familiar with that term, a Bronx jury?
Yes, because you mentioned it on your podcast.
Oh, okay. All right.
But people might not know.
A Bronx jury is something that's it's used all over the country, predominantly in the law enforcement world, but more on the side of the courts. Okay. Now, I had known this term for a while, but I never knew where it came from. So I actually looked it up, and it came from a book which later became a movie called The Bonfire of the Vanities. If anybody remembers that from back in the 80s, it was a very popular movie and a very popular novel. And what it was is they wanted to move a change of venue from New York City, Manhattan proper, to the Bronx, because if they got a Bronx jury, there's no way they were going to lose. That was the idea, because if you have a Bronx jury, basically the prosecution's fucked. Oh, am I allowed to say bad words on here?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I thought I was, but I couldn't remember. So anyways, here we had all 3 of them. All right. And this is now a year and a half, 2 years later. By the time we're actually going to trial, people don't realize that either. It takes a long time to get to trial. And we're sitting in there. I go and give my testimony. Everybody's giving their testimony. And for whatever reason, the district attorney's office broke this into 3 separate cases. In other words, they had 3 different trials for each defendant. Okay. So the first guy, pled guilty right away and went state's evidence to rat out on the other 2. Okay. And he did go to jail, but he got a reduced sentence. The second guy, okay, waited right to the end, which is very common for a lot of bad guys. They'll do that. They'll go all the way up until the trial begins before they take a plea. And literally, as the arresting officer, I've been sitting in the back waiting to see what happens at pretrial. and they'll look back and they'll see you there in your suit, all dressed up, ready to go, and they'll say, okay, I'll take a plea. And what happens is, quite often, the judge will, and the district attorney's office will offer you a plea. You'll say no. They'll offer you a better plea, a better deal, a couple of months down the line. You'll say no. Come trial time before the judge, okay, the judge will give you one last chance, and it won't be as good a deal as the first two you got, okay? And if you say no, the judge he'll be pissed off, and he'll take it personal, and he'll hammer you if you're found guilty, okay? So quite often, that's when people will take a plea. And that's what this kid did. He took a plea at the last second, okay, just before the trial began. So 2 trials are gone. The last one, the third one, okay, is the actual shooter, the guy with the gun, okay? And he got acquitted. First 2 guys went to jail, testified against him. We, the police, testified against him. This poor little pretty young girl who got her whole mouth shot off, okay, is now 19 years old, maybe 18, 19 by now, okay, maybe a little younger. So let's say 17 to 19, she's in there. She testifies against him. She was in witness protection in upstate New York the whole time. I had to uproot her family. Everybody moved upstate to get out of the neighborhood, okay, and they still acquitted him. So
that's wild.
It is wild. Anyway, the only good news on that, and I'm sure people might write in about this, and I'm sorry to say, the bad guy did die like 2 years later, though, in some other criminal incident, and somebody else killed him. So in the end, if you want to call that justice, I personally don't believe in justice. When I say I don't believe it ever happens, because you can never get back what is lost. But that's what happened to him in the end. So.
Wow.
There's a little short, horrible story for you, No.
Tony Stewart says, this is some serious good stuff, Travis.
Well,
and he says, I see that around here on felony cases, take a deal on the first day of trial.
Oh, all the time. And it's funny. I'm, a little, I have a lot of things that I don't like about the plea deals that we have, because a lot of innocent people do take plea deals that shouldn't, but it's easier just to be done with it, and then you have a felony on your record, of course. A lot of really, really bad guys, bad people take plea deals and get really sweetheart deals, just for a win for the district attorney's office, which I don't agree with either. But yeah, in the end, that's why I say there's, I don't really believe in justice, because it's all a game, it's all a game. So.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. I've heard other podcasters that I listen to who have law enforcement backgrounds say the exact same thing as you, that there's no such thing. It's just, there's no justice.
No, there isn't. It's a really sad situation. It is. And again, even though I am, currently knocking the system, if you can come up with a better one, please do. We have a very good system. It's not foolproof, and people are people, and humans are humans. And how many cases you've followed that just blow your mind. How is this possible? But again, we're not privy to what goes on behind the scenes. I mean, I've locked up guys, things that people don't realize all the time. You lock up a guy with a gun or a bunch of drugs or whatever. I've locked up people who've been locked up over 80 times before I got to them. Okay. And the jury is not allowed to know that, because this case has nothing to do with those 80 other cases. You see? And, anybody with any common sense, or the preponderance of evidence, if you will, says, no, this is a bad guy we're dealing with here. He's a serial recidivist, but there's nothing you can do about it, because that's the way the courts, it's a thing too. I always say, when people, like you just mentioned, in law enforcement, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself on your podcast here, but, the police, I don't even think the police should be called law enforcement, because we don't get to enforce shit. Okay. We're the truth seekers who decide if we need to lock somebody up, but the courts decide what to do with it. It's the district attorney's office and the judges who enforce the law, not the police. We're just truth seekers. We try to find the truth as best we can through just a sea of lies, because everybody's lying, on both sides, the good guys and the bad guys, the victims and the victims don't necessarily lie as much as while they're being victimized, they can't see the truth because it's so scary to them. You see what I'm saying? And, some of the statements that you get are just outlandish. It's not possible, And then, of course, the bad guys, of course, they're going to lie. They're bad guys. That's what they do, And so it's our job to do our best to try and figure out the truth, to make an arrest, But in the end, it's up to the courts and the judges. It has nothing to do with us. So.
But then also you're on the front line, though, so people don't necessarily get that, and then they look to you as law enforcement, like, why aren't you doing your job? Why isn't this happening? Why is this continuing to happen? Correct. So on and so forth.
But we are the lowest rung on the ladder, and the old shit rolls downhill is truth. We're the only ones that the public is in contact with, until you're in the system. The only people you ever talk to are the police. You never have a good interaction with the police, even if, if you're calling us, it's because something's bad. You're not calling us because it's a birthday party or it's Thanksgiving. You're calling us for something bad. So your day is already ruined, and I'm certainly not going to make it any better, when I show up. And then again, I have to have, as a professional, I still, even shamefully or sorrowfully, I have to doubt your story in order to ascertain the truth. So I might not be giving you the answers or the attitude that you want, no matter how polite I may be. It may not be the service they are expecting, because I don't know what the truth is. And I just talked to 10 other people this day who lied to me, and so it's a constant battle, for that. And again, it's a completely reactionary job. Everything we do is already after the fact. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does.
The crime is already committed, and then as much as people want the proactive policing, which I think is so important, like I just mentioned, the anti-crime thing, all narcotics for the most part is proactive. We used to have a great thing in New York City, which unfortunately was taken away by one of the mayors, called SNU, which was a street narcotics enforcement unit, which was a dynamite little unit, anti-crime, street crime. There were numerous different proactive policing units, but then you're in trouble for stopping people, even though that's what works. And even though a seasoned police officer usually knows who the bad guys are, you are now whatever, paint it however you want, a racist, a occupier, somebody that's holding down the neighborhood as opposed to trying to keep the neighborhood safe. When we were running around, like I said, in anti-crime, looking for guns, you might have to toss, which is stop and frisk, 20 people, 30 people before you can come up with one gun. And I'm not tossing you because I don't like you. I'm not tossing you because you fit a pattern. There are things that about you that will bring this attention, to me, or bring you to my attention, I should say, and it's done professionally, it's done properly. But again, all you know is, man, the cop stopped me again today, and I didn't do anything wrong,
Right.
But that is proactive policing. You see, that's how you stop the crime from happening to begin with, is by getting the guns and the drugs off the streets to begin with, So it's a miserable, it's a very walking a tightrope.
Yeah. Very well said. Yeah. Let's see. So Tony Stewart says, I seem to be agreeing with everything you're saying, Travis. As you should, Tony Stewart.
Ask if you can give my wife a call.
I love that. Again, if anybody, please, any questions you have for Travis, put it in the chat. Corey says, Travis, are you familiar with Eaton Pats? If so, do you have any opinions about it?
Eaton Pates. I don't know if he was the first ever. He might have been the first ever milk carton kid. Okay.
Oh, him, yes.
And not for nothing. I mean, that was like my age. So if he was alive today, he'd probably be about 60 years old, if not even possibly even older. I don't know, because I was very young when that happened. And that I actually lived, I don't know exactly where it was, but I lived in Lower Manhattan. I lived on 11th Street at that time. And I can't remember if he was an East Side or a West Side kid, Eton Pats. But he was, if not the first ever milk carton kid, he was like one of the first. And it turned out in the end, after everything, and again, I certainly don't want to get the story wrong. They did catch a guy like 40, 50 years later, who I think he worked in a delicatessen or something, a very simple job like that, who I believe was the perpetrator of that awful crime. He snatched a kid up and killed him, and that was it. So yes, I'm familiar. I don't know. I couldn't tell you the facts or tell you the story, but I'm very much familiar.
So he was so from what you're saying, like age-wise, he was around your age.
I believe so. Yeah.
Did that?
And when I say that, at that age too, there's a big difference between being 10 and 13, or being 10 and 7. But he was in that neighborhood. He's like probably 2 or 3 years older or 2 or 3 years younger than me.
Did that impact like you growing up, or did you see that impact your neighborhood? Because I'm thinking in regards to like when Adam Walsh went missing. I was a kid when Adam Walsh went missing, and like overnight everything changed with like
I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say no.
Oh, okay.
Because I think for the most part, like I said earlier, when you're growing up in it, when you're part of it, New York City, or I don't care anywhere you live, Philadelphia, Chicago, you name it, whatever your neighborhood is, you're used to. You see what I'm saying? It's everyday life for you. Like I remember when we did live downtown, we moved uptown. So I was lucky. I had a great mother. Okay. And when I was a kid, I had this, I still have it now, dyslexia. We've all heard of dyslexia before, right? And turns out I'm dyslexic. Well, I was in 3rd grade when my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Pondman, very nice woman, I'll never forget her, all right, said, there's something wrong with this kid because I know he's really smart, but he can't do the reading. And they gave me a whole bunch of tests and they did all this stuff. And it turned out that my mother found a program up in the Yorkville neighborhood on the east side of New York City. All right. And so we left downtown. We moved like whatever it is, 70, 80 blocks north, okay, to Yorkville, because the school had a program for me. And that was why we left Lower Manhattan, moved to Upper Manhattan. And I forgot the point I was going to make there. I don't know. Oh, but so later on, when we would talk about living downtown, she'd be like, oh, no, that was terrible neighborhood, she'd say, and pretend to spit, But really, for us, there was nothing bad to us. My friends were on the block. I had a great time. I have a thing I just recorded recently that'll be coming out soon where I talk about like how we had back then when the sanitation department wouldn't pick up the cars that would be stripped on the corner. Stolen cars would be stripped. They take the tires off and stuff like that. And, older kids would break out the windows or whatever. But like me and my friend Johnny, we were, literally whatever, 8, 9 years old. And we would play like cops and robbers in these abandoned, broken down cars that are sitting on milk crates because the tires are off of them. We thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Where maybe you walking down the block now as a grown woman would be like, I got to get out of this neighborhood. But for us, it was fantastic, and we loved it. I remember there was a place over on, I can't remember exactly what the avenue is. Again, my friend Johnny and I, they had all these boarded up buildings, and now these houses and buildings go. I mean, I saw, what was it? I want to say it was on 10th or 11th Street. One of the Sex and the City actresses lived there. She sold her house. She had a house. All right. When I say house, our houses are still up and down like they are in Boston. They look like little buildings. So she sold her house for something ridiculous like $24 million. $24 million. All right.
That's insane.
But anyway, similar houses and buildings like this when I was a kid were boarded up. Okay. You could have bought it for 30 grand back then in the 70s, Anyway, my friend Johnny, my father told me, don't go in these buildings, stay away, behaviors. Because we used to play. We would go outside and play as if it was our front yard. It was, parents didn't watch us, You know, at 9 years old in New York City, we would just go out. I'd walk, me and my sister would walk to school alone. You know, first grade, second grade, that was normal for us, you know. But anyway, back to the story. So we're running around these buildings, which we should not be in at all, because there's all kinds of crazy junkies and prostitutes and stuff like that could be in there. You don't know who you're going to run into. And this dummy right here, okay, somebody had put a piece of sheetrock over a hole in the floor.
Oh.
And I went right through it, okay? But I got stuck up to my armpits like this, and I didn't go through. Well, Johnny's just a little kid, you know, he's my age, you know, he's like 8 years old, and I'm wedged in this sheetrock, in this floor with my feet dangling down below. He can't get me out. He ran down the block to where the barber's was, and he got one of the barbers, he had this little Cuban barber shop that was in the middle of the block, and one of those guys came across the street and pulled me out of the sheetrock. And, you know, unfortunately, he told my parents that I got a beating that night. But that, you know, lesson learned. Listen to your father, kids. You know, don't go around abandoned buildings when you're not supposed to. So.
Oh, wow. That's funny. Tony Stewart, I love your comment. Seems like you had a great mom, Travis.
I had a wonderful mother. I did. You know, she was a good lady. Took good care of us.
I'm going to give that a star. I love that. He also says, Travis, I heard people saying the streets seemed safer when the mob was in control back in the day.
Well, I've heard things like this, and this is something that I will tell you, Tony. I remember, okay, it was not necessarily our neighborhood, but again, our neighborhoods were so much more. There was so much more of a closeness where everybody knew everybody. It was much more working class. We're talking about Manhattan right now, and the Manhattan of today, you walk down the street, nobody's going to make eye contact with you. Nobody says hello. Nobody cares at all. People in your building don't even say hello to you. That's how cold they are. When I was a kid, you literally knew everybody in your building. You knew everybody on your block. You knew everybody from your school. If, you know, me and my brother would, you know, cut school, which we did regularly, all right? And my mother would find out about it because somebody would say, hey, why wasn't your boy in school today? But they would know, and they would know to tell her, you know? But back to the mob question, I want to say it was 60 Minutes, okay? And I'm going way back to the 70s now. Did a special on how the Little Italy section, the Arthur Avenue section of the Bronx, okay? And the Bronx in the 70s was on fire. Everybody was setting their buildings on fire. It was just a really tough place to live. And if you want a good documentary, look up the Rubble Kings, R-U-B-L-E, Rubble Kings, okay? And that's a great documentary. And in fact, any of you listeners who are familiar with the movie The Warriors, okay, not The Wanderers, which is about gangs in the Bronx, but The Warriors. It's a pretty silly, very dated movie, but a little part of that is true, and they cover that in Rubble Kings, okay? But now let me go back a little bit more to what I was saying about 60 Minutes. So they did a special on how the Belmont section of the Bronx, which is that little Italian section right there, was the safest neighborhood in the country at the time. It was the hole in the donut. Everything around it was god awful. You know, all kinds of violence, crime, drugs, et cetera, but nobody messed around in there because the mob would go after you. Everybody knew you don't mess around on these blocks, and that's how it was. And even in Manhattan, there were certain areas or certain blocks within the neighborhood that you would know, look, you can't sell drugs on this block. You just can't. You know, we even had like a rule in our neighborhood where you don't steal from your own neighborhood. All right. So, you know, kids, I was never a thief. I didn't steal or rob anybody. I never did that in my life. But people that did, the rule was you would go to another neighborhood to steal and then come back to your neighborhood because these are our people. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, that absolutely does.
You know, I mean, we're not condoning stealing at all, but
right.
If you're going to do it in another neighborhood, you know. And there was a little, I guess, honor amongst thieves there.
Interesting. Tony as well, great 70s movie. Travis, my birthday is the same as John Gotti, October 27th, which is my birthday too. So Corey Novak, Travis, you should reach out to, I'm probably going to butcher this, Mike Cadella. He's another NYPD guy that goes on podcasts. He's got some very interesting stories like yourself.
Well, I'm going to write down this guy's name right here and see if I can get a hold of him. Mike Codella.
Codella. Thank you, Corey Novak.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll see if I can get a hold of him.
Cool. Travis, I can tell you have great street knowledge.
Well, it's just knowing what you know.
It's your home.
It's what you're used to, exactly. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know one of the story that you gave earlier was a bit. I feel like to say tragic doesn't even do it justice. Where,
would you like a darker one?
Oh, I was going to say a more lighthearted one, but
lighthearted one. All right.
I would love a darker one.
Okay.
I don't know if I would love a darker one. All right. Why don't we do the darker one and then the lighthearted one? Okay,
very good. Darker one. All right. Well, there's a bunch that I could tell you, but this one I've told before on other podcasts, and people, again, seem to like it. Okay. We had this started out as a robbery case. Okay. Where a small group of youths, all right, in the Bronx again, because all my work was in the Bronx. I grew up in Manhattan, but I worked in the Bronx as a cop. And there were several robberies of bodegas. And if anybody doesn't know what a bodega is, it's a delicatessen that's owned by Spanish people. And for whatever reason, the name gets bounced back and forth, bodega or deli, depending on who owns it. Okay. But a lot of times it's a little bit more of got a bit more of a quickie mart kind of thing too, because you can get a sandwich, but you also get, it's a small grocery store. You get toilet paper, you can get, anything else that you want in there also. So several of them had been robbed with the same description coming over these 3 or 4 young kids, one of them being a girl, okay, which is a little bit unusual. So a couple of Chinese restaurants and a couple of bodegas. And then in one of the bodegas, all right, they shot one of the women, one of the woman that was working the bodega in the shoulder. And she survived, but she was shot in the shoulder. Okay. And so we're looking all over the place for these kids, but it's tough. New York City, it's the Bronx, it's a busy place. Lots of stuff is going on. Couldn't find it. Well, we get a call, okay? And I'm starting from where we learn about this, okay? Yeah. So and then I'll tell you the backstory. So we get a call from the school, and there's a kid at school that's been bragging about how he's in this gang, and they're running around, doing these robberies because, they're proud of it. They're proud of being bad guys, being tough guys, very, very common situation. These idiots today with the Facebook, is unbelievable how many kids are caught doing heinous crimes because they actually post them on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. Yeah. And this was way before any of that was thought of, right? So anyway, we go to school and we pick this kid up, all right? He's a young guy. He's like 14 years old, okay? And we got him. We have to get his mother in there. And now the mothers or parents sometimes can be every bit as difficult as the kids. This time we were lucky she was not. All right. She was a good, decent woman, and she showed up and she was at her wit's end with this kid. And between some very strong words and a few slaps in the head by his mother, okay, the kid told us what we wanted to know. Okay. And so we're listening to the story, and he names 2 other male friends and a, female friend who's doing these robberies with. Okay. And the story is, and how the story goes, because as he's telling us, he also describes a body. And now, a body. We're very interested in this story, obviously, right? Yeah. So the first 2, this young man and young woman, not this kid, okay, they make a deal with an older gentleman, okay, from, I believe it was Rochambeau Avenue. And the young man escorts the girl there, who again is only 14 years old. Okay. And she's going to have sex with this old man who's like 70. Okay. For money. Okay, and that's going to be their money for the day. But instead, when they get there, her and her partner, all right, the kid she's hanging out with, tie this guy to a chair and give him a beating. Okay, and as they're going through all this stuff and robbing his apartment, all right, they take his wallet, they get his credit cards, his bank card rather, and they threaten him to stab him, if he doesn't give up the code. And they go and they get, at the time, I think it was like the max you could do was like $300 a day. It's changed over the years, but I remember as a young man when I first had my own bank card, it was only like $300 a day. Mm-hmm. But they're using this, and they have this poor guy tied up in his chair. All right, they're running out, taking his money, going to buy Chinese food, McDonald's, whatever they want to do, buy some new sneakers, come back, beat him up some more. Okay, in the end, they end up stabbing him to death. Then they drag him into his bedroom and they put him in the bed. They untie him, they put him in the bed, and they cover his body with as many clothes and blankets and everything that they can to try to keep the smell down, because they know that he's going to start to smell. Okay, and so they used his apartment as like a clubhouse for like the next 2 weeks as this man decomposed in the bedroom. Okay, while ransacking everything in his apartment, they come across a small 38 caliber, what we would call Saturday Night Special, small, little snub-nosed pistol. Okay, and they love this, and they go out and they start doing robberies with it. So now they've taken all the money out of this guy's account, the guy that they killed. Okay, and now they're out doing robberies. Remember, now we have a gang of 4, okay, who are all like 13, 14 years old. And they're running around doing this, and they're racking up. I mean, they got like 6 robberies on them, and we don't even know about this old guy yet, okay? This, we just happen to know when we catch this kid at school, okay?
Yeah.
So, where were we? All right. So we go, kid, he's terrified of his mother. He's more scared of his mother than he is of us, all right? Gives us everybody. We have all their names. We know where they live. We go scoop them all up. Boom, boom, boom. We get the other 3. I'm sorry. We get the other 2, boy and a girl. Okay. And we couldn't get the other kid. All right. Because he was not home. Turns out he hadn't been home for like 2 days. Okay. Why? Because the other 2, the boy and the girl, had also killed him in the apartment. The other kid didn't know. Okay. And so what had happened was the second kid, their teammate, their gang mate, their brother in arms that they had, said, look, I can't be a part of this anymore. I'm scared shit. I was down for the robberies. Now we're shooting people. We got a dead guy in the bedroom. He was getting scared. And so turns out the girl was kind of like the leader of this gang. Okay. Had the other guy hold him down, and they put a pillow around the pistol that they had, and they shot him, and then they stabbed him after they shot him, and they dragged him into the bedroom too. We still don't know about this. We heard about the old guy, but we don't know about the young kid yet until we actually get into the apartment to do our search. Okay, but we got everybody scooped up, and so that's in the end. The story of stories is that this young girl, okay, who's out of her mind, and who knows what kind of a victim she was that led her to this life,
Yeah.
but that's neither here nor there at the time. But she would corral all of these boys together through sexual favors. Okay. And she had them all wrapped around her finger, because they're all 13, 14 years old, and they'll say anything, for a favor. Okay. Yeah. And again, she was going to see this older fella that night, again, for sex on his end, money on her end, and decided to rob him. And of course, a day or 2 goes by, they decide to kill him. And then they just make this apartment of his their clubhouse for almost 2 weeks as he rots in the bedroom, and then end up killing the other kid because they're afraid he's going to rat on them, And it was quite a dark, awful story. And that, again, we're talking about what most people would consider children.
Yeah.
And when I say most people quite often don't realize, and I will say this, about myself now, again, I was never bad like these kids here. But at my age, at 14 years old, I was much, much more mature than many 35-year-olds I meet today, you know? And it wasn't that I was any smarter or any cooler. It was just, it was New York City, and it was a place where you grew up rather quickly, And in that particular case, these kids were exceptionally mature and exceptionally dangerous for 14 years old.
Yeah.
And that's the end of that one.
Ooh. And let me guess, so they get a Bronx jury?
Well, for them, they're all kids. All right. So they all go to family court. They were young enough in New York at the time, and I'm sure it's still the same, 16 and older, you're charged as an adult. Okay. So they would have been through the family court system. And to tell you the truth, I was out of it by the time that came. I don't know what the disposition was. That's the thing that people quite often don't realize either. If you don't go to court yourself as the police officer, you may never know where these cases go. All right. By the time it goes to trial and something else happens, you may hear about it because the district attorney will say, hey, you remember that kid? Yeah, you got 7 years, And I know the disposition of many cases, especially when I had to go to court again and again. But quite often, you never know. They just kind of disappear,
Interesting.
And, it is because people don't realize that, you're dealing with other work or other jobs or other cases. Life goes on, and these are all now, once you make the arrest and it's handed over to the courts, unless I'm going to court on that case, I don't remember it at all. It just fades into the background. So, well, that's a memorable one. I'll remember that one forever. So.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, wow. Yeah. It's just so fascinating because, like the psychology person in me thinks like what in life led, like particularly this girl to make the decision she did. But.
Well, she obviously, and I'm not going to make any excuses for her, but she obviously had, a rotten life and rotten parents, and she fell through the system, fell through the cracks at school, as most kids do. Especially, I make the joke myself. I went to public school, and I always say I'm the victim of the New York City public school system. I left school at 15, and if it wasn't for the Army, I would have never been a police officer. The military is what was my in to the police department, and even then they've changed it so much where. In my time, you could go into the service without a high school diploma. You can't do that anymore. See, so they've taken that rug off the ladder for uneducated kids. They can't go to the military to right the ship anymore. It's too bad because it was a big helper in my case anyway.
Yeah, that is too bad. Yeah. Let's see. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. So in regards to a more lighthearted story.
I'll give you a better one, all right?
I mean, I could listen to the dark ones all day, but I know people are going to be like, Danny, knock it off.
All right. So we'll go back to the Bronx again. And I want to say this is Bainbridge Avenue. I could be wrong. Okay. Now, the Bronx has many, 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 many large buildings, but it also has lots of old private homes that are wedged in between these buildings quite often. All right. So we get a call, my partner Nikki and I, of a foul odor. A foul odor is only one thing, a dead body. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It always comes over as a foul odor, and you know what it's going to be. And we were in uniform at the time. We were patrol guys. Okay. We were very young on the job. And we get there, and it's a private house. And sure enough, you could smell it outside. It's summertime. The windows were closed, but there was the smell of death. And death only smells like death. Everybody that's familiar with that smell, once you know it, you know exactly what it is. And so we're there. And the doors are locked, and we can't get in. So we're going to have to what we call forced entry. We're going to force our way in, but we're not allowed to do that without a boss. Unless it's an emergency situation, you have to call a boss. So the sergeant comes over, and he says, okay, yeah. He gives us permission, okay? Rather than kicking in the door, okay, the way the steps worked, it was like the steps were like 6 or 8 steps high, okay? And there were no bars or gates on this window to the left. It was an older one-family brick home. So what I had done is my partner leaned way over he was a little smaller than me. He leaned way over the thing, and I held him by his gun belt and I held onto the banister so he could reach. And he was able to get his fingers up under the window and push it open. All right? Great. Then I gave him a little boost, and he slipped himself in like this, okay? Into the window, came around, click, 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 unlocked the door. We're in. Oh, and the place is a wreck. So now the smell is strong. You could smell a lot of death in there, which is unfortunate, right? And so, because we know what we're looking for. But it's, what do they call it? It's just, the person that lived there is like a hoarder. There's like newspapers stacked up to the ceiling, just stuff and stuff and stuff. And everything is like an 18 to 24-inch tunnel that you're going through stuff, because it literally goes up to the ceiling, taller than we are everywhere you go. And so we do our search room to room to room to room, looking around this house, okay? And we get into the bedroom, and there she is, this poor woman, I don't know, 70, 80 years old. And there's a thing when, if you've never seen dead bodies in the state, which I'm sure many of you have not, your listeners have not, or yourself, but just like when you see a dead deer on the side of the road, a lot of times when you die, okay, all the muscles are on your spine tighten up, and you kind of do this thing like this, and your mouth is gaping open, okay? It's a very common way. That's how you find a lot of elderly people when they die, in bed or on the floor or whatever. Their mouth is wide open because their muscles contract, and it pulls their head back, okay? And this poor woman is lying there, and she's in her bed, and again, she's elderly, in this room full of shit up to the ceiling. And it's sad, and a young police officer will go to many of these in his career, And so the boss at the time, he's going to give us a scratch. A scratch is when they sign your books. We used to have these memo books that we used to have to carry around in a leather binder, and it fit in your back pocket. And you say, okay, yes, I said gain entry, write a little story. Boom, he signs his name, that he's aware of it. So as he's signing our books, the three of us are standing here facing each other, right? And this old woman is laying in the bed, and she sits up like a vampire and screams, "What are you doing in my house?" She wasn't dead. She screamed so loud, my partner, Nikki, jumped into my arms and hugged me because he scared us so much. 3 grown men, 3 rough, tough Bronx cops, all jumped off the floor in terror because she sat up like a crazy vampire. And it turned out she was just a crazy old lady, and she had dead dogs and cats in the house.
Oh.
Smelling up the whole block. And, it had gotten warm enough that these things were cooking in there, or maybe she had left the windows open and the smell was getting out, but she was living in that filth, But the punchline of the story, again, if you can picture the 3 of us leaping off our feet because she sat up. She didn't sit up when we first walked in. We're all relaxed. We're hanging out. Boss is signing the book. We're chatting like it's nothing. What are you doing in my house? And we all jumped. That was a pretty funny story. So.
Oh my gosh. That's what my first thought is no, none of you went to check her. You all just assumed.
Well, it was not much to assume. You could smell it and you could see it, and we'd all seen it before,
Very true.
And what would happen, of course, is we'd have to call an ambulance. We don't get to pronounce that yet. You have to call it, and it's a whole thing that's going to happen. But we're still only 2 or 3 minutes into this, So, and there you go. And that was that.
Well. Tony, did you have to get a change of underwear?
Yeah. Thank God, no. But I'll tell you what, Tony, it was a very, very scary couple of seconds right then.
Oh my goodness. That's wild. That's wild. But I wish I didn't have to hear about the dead animals. That's like my.
Yeah.
But no, I have through my professional career, I've had to deal with hoarders, and I've gone to very extensive trainings on it, and it's.
When we were kids, going back to my teenage years, on 85th Street off of First Avenue, we had a little clubhouse. All right, because back then there were so many. When I was talking about warehousing buildings, there were many empty buildings even in fairly nice neighborhoods because they wanted to tear them down. And so we had a building there that we had taken over and turned into a clubhouse for all the 84th Street guys, even though it was on 85th Street. This was part of our little territory, if you will. And we had this this little building that we had, and we used it as a clubhouse. We drink beer in there and smoke pot in there, and you take your girlfriend there to make out or whatever, you know. And the building right next door, okay, was this poor old woman named Annie, and she was all, you know, we used to call her bent over badly because she was, you know, very bent over. The old lady that walked with a walker or a cane. She would drag her shopping cart up and down the block. We'd always help her out and get her groceries up the stairs for her. But she was another one in the summertime from the dead cats or dogs or whatever she had in that building. She was the only person that lived in a 4-story apartment building all by herself. But she had it all locked up so nobody could get in there, you know. And it was she was a very sad character, and eventually they came and took her away, you know. And then the building, of course, was torn down and renovated, turned into a high rise, whatever they did with it. But it was not unusual, you know, for people to live that way. Well, a very famous story you might know about I think it was the Collier brothers. Are you familiar with that name?
No.
The two brothers that they actually tore the building down and then turned it into a park. But that was back in, like, I don't know, turn of the century type times, you know. Obviously, the turn of the 19th, you know, the 18th century to the 19th century to the 20th century. I'm sorry. And they were two brothers that had an entire building that was just, you know, loaded with crap, and they actually died in there because one of them, I believe, was ill, and the other one took care of him, and he died in a collapse of garbage.
Oh, yep. I just looked it up. Yep.
Yeah. What's the year on it?
Yeah. Yeah. Though that's hoarding, man. It's no joke. That stuff is no joke. Oh man. What other kind of more, because I mean, there's so many like tragic stories you could tell, which are the ones I want to hear. But the audience is like loving your Eddie, more humorous stories. What other humorous stories?
Stories. I don't know. I wish I had prepared a little bit better, because, you know, sometimes when you put it on the spot, they don't pop right into your brain right away.
That's my bad.
No, it's not at all. Geez, I'm sorry. Right now, I'm drawing a blank, even though there are probably a dozen I could come up with. You know?
No, that's fair. That's fair. Then let's go back to the bad ones. No, I am like very fascinated by like the late 80s, early 90s scene of New York from what I've read about it. Just like,
right.
Yeah, like the nightclub life. Like,
here's one that comes to mind. Okay. It's a short one, but it's funny. It wasn't funny to me at the time, but people get a kick out of it. I was working at a place called Hades. It was a small club, small bar. It was more of a regular bar, but they did do music. And it was 2 stories because it was the first floor and they had a basement. And it was on, I think, 94th and 2nd. And I was a door guy there, you know, bouncer, if you will, but we always say door guy in New York City. I was one of the door guys there. And I came to work one night, and the second I walked in, there was a fellow named John. I think he was Australian, if I'm not mistaken, behind the bar. And he immediately waves me in, come in. So I'm just showing up. It's like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm walking in to start my shift. He's like, over here, he's pointing. It's loud, you know. I get down there, and there's a woman in a wheelchair, okay? And he's like, she's got to go. And I'm like, she's got to go? She's in a wheelchair. What are you doing to me, John? You know? So I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, you have to go. But as soon as I talk to her, she holds up a large cross like this and says, get on your knees. So now, obviously, I'm dealing with a lunatic. You know, we realize this. Now, she's in a wheelchair. What is she going to do? Right? So I get behind her and I start pushing. She's trying to fight me a little bit with her hands, but I'm a young, strong fella. I get her up to the door. And as soon as I get her to the door, both hands come out. She grabs both sides of the door jamb. Okay. And I'm asking her, please, you have to go. She's screaming and howling. You have no idea how strong a woman is, even if she's only 120 pounds, who wheels herself around all day in New York City. These things are like steel clamps on either side of the store. And I literally have to take 2 hands to get one of her hands off. But as soon as I get one off and I try to get the other one off, the other one goes back onto the door. So we're playing this game for all of, 2 or 3 minutes where I can't get her arms off. And what am I going to do? I certainly can't, rough up a 120-pound-year-old woman in a wheelchair. Luckily, finally, I'm able to get one off and kind of hug her like this and get the other one off and push her out. By now, I got like 20 people, 30 people out on the sidewalk watching me do this. I got the whole bar behind me watching me do this. The bar is mostly laughing at me because they're on my side. But believe me, the people on the sidewalk are not my friends at all, watching me throw this poor woman in a wheelchair out the door. So, again, not much of a punchline, but it was a pretty funny situation.
Man, if that was nowadays, that would have been like the new Instagram viral video.
Oh, forget about it. Forget about it. That whole thing, I mean, the thing with phones today is unbelievable because you can't do anything. The things that we got away with, I don't even want to say get away with because I don't think it's just the way life was and the way it should be. You had a problem with somebody, you had a fight. It was a fight. It wasn't all over the news or all over Instagram or all over Facebook. It was what it was, and it was over. Done. Where now, I mean, God forbid, you can't, you say the wrong thing, you make a joke, and it's off color, and it's all over everything.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
I mean, do you ever have any problems with that with your show? Does anybody? I'm sure there are people who complain on occasion, but I know I've talked to other podcast people. They're just trying to have a conversation, and you end up, with the whole cancel culture. So.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like any see, James Watson has been around quite a while, and he's regardless of the platform that somebody's on, when you put yourself out there like that, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. I've never had a Twitter account, and I don't ever plan to. And like, it's funny because talking to like other content creators and like, I can give advice from like the YouTube perspective, but like I've had so many people who have been in like kind of quote unquote Twitter wars.
Yes.
And they're just like, don't ever get on Twitter. It's the worst thing you can do. And I was just like, I've never had one. I'm not going to start one now.
All of this stuff is new to me, and it's all because of the books. I never had a Facebook. I still don't have a Facebook, but everybody was saying you have to have a presence. You have to have a presence. So I started an Instagram, and I started a Twitter, which I'm never on. I kind of like the Instagram because I post a lot of old pictures from back in the day. So if anybody wants to look me up, it's Another Nobody TM. That's me, Another Nobody Travis Myers, and I post all pictures, from my teenage years and cop years and being a father, et cetera, that kind of stuff. And of course, things like this, like I'm coming on your show, I post your show. And I have a Twitter thing, but I don't do posting on there. And Twitter is a very negative space in general. It seems everybody is mad about something. And I kind of don't even care to go on it because whenever I do, I mean, you read 10 posts, it's negative, negative, negative. I don't want to continue. It turns me off. The whole thing turns me off, And I don't know why people love it so, but they do. People go crazy for it.
Yeah, I won't start one. I've never had one. It's just.
Well, I'm here to tell you I have one, and you're not missing anything.
Yeah, but it's so interesting because I'm just like, maybe it's because I didn't grow, like I grew up in a time, oh my God, I'm gonna sound so old, but grew up in a time where like you go outside and play, you do all that, and then the internet came, and then cell phones versus like, I think people now where that's all they know.
Well,
so it's like I can close my computer and turn off my phone and live life, and there's like a generation that I'm like, they don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I've never even played a video game in my life, in real life. Okay. And when I say that, the only time I did, my son I played the Wii once when we got a Wii. I played that once. I didn't like it. My son had some kind of World War II one, which everybody out there is laughing because they know what it is, and I can't think of the name of it right now. I played that with him once for maybe a half an hour. I couldn't do it, so I didn't want to learn how. But I never played the games when I was probably 14 or 15 is when they became popular in arcades, which nobody even knows what an arcade is anymore, or the corner pizzeria would always have the Donkey Kong or the Pac-Man, would be in there. All right. But by the time I was, again, 14, 15, I was already going to bars. I had a job, I had my own money. So I could spend 75 cents and buy a quart, because they weren't 40s back then. They used to be a quart of beer. I could buy a quart of Budweiser for 75 cents. Okay. A slice of pizza for 50 cents. Why in the world am I going to put it in a machine that's just going to annoy me? That was my mentality. I was more interested in drinking beer and chasing girls. So there was no video games in my life. And actually, I'm happy for it. I think I'm better off without it. I know now a lot of people like it because they play, well, kind of like what we're doing right now. I don't know what it's called, remotely. They're on the same game, virtually. They're on the same game, but they live in different cities. So, if you have your high school friend or your college friend or whatever it is, you guys kind of hang out together on your game. It's okay. I don't need it. I'm better off without it, in my opinion. There's no appeal to that at all to me. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a gamer, so there's that. But
you're not a gamer either. But see, this thing recently when you were doing because I followed you on Instagram and I saw you doing your Karen Reed. There you go. You were up there for a lot of the cases. I'm sure you did a show on it too. You went up several times. Something like Twitter would be perfect for that though, because you literally could be putting it out, 10 times a day as it's happening, and people would respond and follow through that. For that, I can see it being worthwhile. But if you're just going to get on there and listen to the world bitch at each other, because it's a miserable place. It's a miserable place.
Twitter, where happiness goes to die.
I like that. I'm going to use that if you don't mind.
So. Oh, I did not make that up. So,
okay.
Gosh. Oh, okay. It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. But whatever.
X, yes.
Whatever.
But again, you're making me change things. You can't be one thing for so many years and then expect me to remember to say the right thing. I still call it Twitter, even though it's X.
Yeah. No. Same. Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a question for you.
Oh, please.
Tony, and this is very off subject.
All right.
So Tony clearly knows New York. Travers, how good are the steaks at Sparks Steakhouse?
I'm sorry, Tony, I've never been. I've never been. As it's a funny thing, as a kid growing up in New York City, all right. I never been up to the top of the Empire State Building. I've never been to the Statue of Liberty. Okay. Even though I live there, I've never been. The only time I was in the Twin Towers prior to 9/11, and I didn't go on 9/11, I went on 9/12, where I spent the first 5 days. That's a whole nother story we can talk about another time. But I used to go and deliver liquor to the Twin Towers, but I've never been up to the top to the observation deck because I was working. And I've never been to Sparks. I've never been to Smith & Wollensky's. I've never been to Peter Luger's. I've never been to any of these places because, again, we're working guys. We don't have that kind of money, And to me, as somebody who's always, not that I'm not talking about I love my mother dearly, but a guy who, for the most part, took care of himself, it was foolish to spend money that way. Does that make sense to you? And even as an adult, I still carry that with me where I don't mind. I have money now. I can spend it on whatever I want. My kids are grown. They're out of college. But if I go someplace and it's, $75 for my plate, we're not going there, honey. I'm sorry. We're going somewhere else because it's just stupid to me. And I'm not going to enjoy that meal. So I'm sorry, Tony. I can't give you a review on Sparks because I've never been, and I probably will never go. Because even if you were paying, even if Tony broke down and took me out to dinner, all right, I'd want to go to a more reasonable place than to spend money because I just can't enjoy it,
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Yeah. He goes, that's okay. He asks, been to the Ravenite Social Club?
Well, no, they wouldn't let me in.
They wouldn't let you in?
No, the Ravenite Social Club was John Gotti's private club. It was a game. It was a mafia club.
Oh, see, I don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now
Okay.
I've walked
I
past it.
think I was thinking it was like some type of like nightclub.
I've walked past it dozens of times. Okay. Now I think it's a shoe store or something like that. I'm not sure. But that's the Ravenite is actually where John Gotti got jammed up because they would use an old lady's apartment that lived like 2 floors above the Ravenite, like on the 3rd floor or something like that. They would have private meetings up there and discuss all kinds of awful crimes and murders and racketeering type stuff. And the FBI got a bug in there so they could listen to everything. And that's what jammed him up, the Ravenite Social Club. Not the Ravenite Club itself, but the apartment two floors above is what the FBI had bugged. And yeah, there's another interesting. Oh,
What is happening?
I stepped on the wire for my computer here. I'm sorry, because I'm plugged in. What was I saying? A very interesting documentary that everybody should watch called Fear City. Okay. And Fear City is about when the mob had a stranglehold on New York City. Okay. All this time that we're talking about the 70s in particular, the 70s and 80s, and how, Mayor Giuliani, he wasn't the mayor at the time when he was what the hell was he, Attorney General, and his crew really, really brought the mob to its knees. So it's because it's nothing, even though it's still around, it's nothing compared to what it was in the 1970s. And that's a very interesting documentary if anybody wants to watch it.
Good to know. Good to know. Tony's giving me a hard time. Come on, Dan. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not as cultured. I don't know as much as I should, and that is on me. All right. So yeah, we're a little past an hour and a half. So if anybody has any last minute questions for Tony, Tony, like, sorry, your name is like over and over and over. I mean, for Travis, sorry about that. My screen is just covered with Tony comments.
Well, I saw a whole bunch of things there. I don't know what it was. Something about the subway. It flashed up so quick, I couldn't tell you.
Oh, I think that was in reference to instead of paying $75 a plate, he's like, maybe Subway for me.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah. Then planted a bug there at the old lady's place. Mm-hmm. So yeah, any last minute questions for Travis? Definitely let me know. And yeah, Travis, I would obviously love to have you back anytime you are more than welcome.
I'd love to come back. I like visiting with you. You're a doll. It's very nice to talk to you. I love that your friends and followers and whatever the right word is that your listeners write in. That's a great thing to have.
Pain in the butt people like Tony and James who are here every time just causing trouble. Yeah, whatever term we use. Yeah, and especially if like in advance, if people want to like message me like, hey, like I would love to hear Travis talk more about X, Y, and Z, so that like I know that in advance and can let you know.
Anything. But you never know. You're an easy person to talk to. Whenever we get together, the conversation just comes naturally to me. So
I'm so excited to like hang out with you in person in a few weeks.
Oh, I can't wait to meet you too. That's going to be exciting.
Podcast Festival. Yeah. So yeah, definitely everybody check that out. True Crime Podcast Festival. It will be here in Boston, aka Danvers. So yeah, you'll get to meet Travis, meet me, meet a ton of other content creators. There's some cool panels.
Yeah, it should be a good thing. Now we have that. You and I have that together. The weekend after that, I want to say Nashua, New Hampshire. I have a thing called, because that's your neck of the woods too.
Yeah.
It's all up there. The Monster Expo. It's a horror fest.
Monster. The
Monster, Monstah. They spell it. The Monster Expo. And it's a horror fest. And we're going to go to that because it turns out that a lot of our true crime and horror fans kind of hold hands. It's all the same group, So if anybody wants to come visit me there, I would love to say hello. And then, of course, you are going to Denver this year, are you not?
CrimeCon, yep.
All right. And we'll both be in CrimeCon again. So if anybody wants to come there, don't hesitate. Get your tickets, book your stuff. CrimeCon, and we'll both attest to this, is a good time. If you're a crime buff, CrimeCon rocks. That is the biggest best that I've seen so far.
It's awesome. It
It
is
is, it is
awesome.
serious stuff. And it's, in fact, it's one of those things where there's so many things you can't see everything, which is
I
kind of too bad.
know. Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 rooms where it's back to back to back. Everything
Yeah.
is so you have to choose what you want. It's
Well,
all strategy to
Crime
try to
Con
fit it
does,
all in.
yeah, Crime Con does it right. It's a good show. So.
Yeah, for sure. So Tony Stewart, Travis, your own channel, Danny, please post. So Travis, where can people find you?
Okay, so now for the, you showed my book earlier. The
Echo.
what do you call it? Oh, people
Tommy
writing.
Keanne.
Yeah, the Tommy Keanne Detective Series. That's where we have, if you will call it fame, anything that's what got all this stuff started was my sister and I starting the series. In fact, William Tell, I will tell you right now, I'll hold up a book myself. This comes out tomorrow, everybody. Book number 6. All right. Currently, and unfortunately, because I don't know what the hang up is, we had some kind of problems with the publisher where it's only out in paperback right now, but the hardcover and Kindle is coming. It's just, for whatever reason, didn't make the release date, but it's out tomorrow. All right. Those are our books. And then we have my Instagram, which is Another Nobody TM on the Instagram. And we have For Boston's Media. All right. You like that name? Does a thing for us where they host our podcast, which is the Another Nobody podcast, where I do what you do with a little less grace. Okay. And I interview all kinds of crime people, authors, cops, different things. And so far it's been a hit. We've only been doing it, I think we've got 25, 26 episodes down now.
Yeah.
And I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it very much. Every Tuesday. That comes out every Tuesday. So today's a Monday. So tomorrow we have a new episode coming out tomorrow. And again, that's turned out to be pretty popular. So please give us a listen. Give us a listen and give us a review and tell us what you think, because I love that. I can't do better, or I can't give you what you want if we don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
How's that?
And a wise man once said, do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
Right.
That's right. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, and follow young Danny here. All right.
So Beckham came in a bit late. So Mr. Beckham is he's my co-host from another YouTube channel, but he'll come on here every Friday night and do like the true crime and chill with me. So
what is your other one now? Is it only Charles Manson? Do I have that right? Is it Charles Manson?
Yeah. So that was on the Paulcast. We did, oh my gosh, we started that during the pandemic. We would do like 3 or 4 live shows a week.
Wow.
We look back and we're like, how the hell did we do that?
Yeah.
That was wild. And then like as we've learned more about like the case, it's like some of the content we had, it's like, oh, that's a little out of date, or that was incorrect. So there's not as much on that channel because we've tried to kind of take down what maybe we got wrong in that. So long story short, but yeah, that's only the Charles Manson case. So yeah, but with here, you still get Danny, so it's awesome. Just kidding. I'm humble if you didn't get that. So, well, thank you so much, Travis, for coming back. I really appreciate it. It's always great hanging out with you and chatting. Thanks
for having me back and letting me rant about my nonsense and, push our upcoming show dates. I'm very much looking forward to that. And it's always a pleasure, Danny. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Anytime. And thank you to everybody who's watching, who was in the chat and had some really cool questions for Travis. I mean, the ones particularly about New York, that's all Travis. I have no clue. All right, everybody. Thank you again for joining and tuning in tonight. And remember, until next time, we don't live in darkness. Darkness lives in us. Bye, everyone.